Thanks for checking out SYMFONI on YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe and like our videos for updates.
That came from heaven. So please, when I speak, you might also listen to this. It could have been possibly a spiritual message that I'm delivering. I had prepared a whole booklet of lecture, which I had planned to deliver for 100 minutes, 1 year, 1 minute, 1 year, 1 minute. But for want of time, and knowing that there is already a book on Okpara, and a lot of people had said few things about him that are already contained here, I will, as much as possible, cut it, at least to make my good friend Omeneko happy this evening. So, in doing that, I had wanted to look at the profile of Dr. Okpara that has been said, and I'm sure in different materials that are scattered there today. I looked into his leadership, policy, philosophy, which is more of humanism captured in his Okparanomics, which is a book to be launched today. But at this point, I will leave that part of Okparanomics and dwell on the lessons that we may have learned from there. The takeaway from that is legacy, just as I will leave his profile and discuss on the lessons of his life. And then I will look into a possibility of recreating the Okpara magic in southeastern states, especially in this our 21st century. So permit me to go straight to the lessons I think I personally have learned from my Okpara's life. As you can see, he became the premier. Hello? He became the premier at the age of 39 and ruled for only 6 years. And his legacy is enormous. I think also that his life in public service can be underscored by his humanitarian approach to the project. If you look at the second point here, he was service-driven. He was mentored by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who influenced him through his charisma, mentored him, and then eventually handed over the leadership for NCNC to him when he rose to become the Governor General of Nigeria. That in itself underscores the importance of mentoring in politics. What we have today is more or less godfatherism, where leaders are picked for some kind of personal purpose and interest, which more often than none is selfish. I think today, if we go by the biblical incident, someone like Nnamdi Azikiwe will be saying, "Indeed, this is my beloved boy in whom I am well placed." How many of our leaders today can acclaim such a statement in the hands of mentee you have left behind? We look at the third aspect of the lesson I've learned from M.I. Okpara's life. We learn from his selflessness and integrity, which he brought to public life. Somebody has mentioned it here. He presided over the creation of many government reserve areas in Enugu and Port Harcourt and all the places. But it's on record that until he came back from exile, he had no personal house of his own. The only house that can be attributed to him was a house his friends got together to build for him in 1979 upon his return. So that is why I can refer to Michael Okpara in a book written by Christian Ibodo Lessons in Leadership and Service, where he described him as a historic statesman and everlasting moral compass. That puts Dr. Okpara in the same pedestal with the likes of Julius Nyerere, who is popularly known as Mwalimu in Swahili, which means a teacher. Indeed, he was a president of his country, and today he's been beatified, and the Catholic Church is looking up that sometime soon he might be a saint. That underscores the fact that contrary to common belief today, especially in Nigeria, that politics is for the bad people. Politics is for evil people. That politics in itself is not bad, but when good people decide to stay far away from politics, the bad people who populate politics will now continue to display their bad character. Politics do not change you. What you are, if you are not in politics, you can still be a thief if you can thief in politics. So I encourage all to understand this. I think also very important for us to note that the Okpara that is mentioned here is a book I've read over and over again. In fact, I have the original copy of that lecture given by Dr. Pius Okigbo. And that also added to my admiration to Okpara. He has become what he is, not only because he had the opportunity to be a premier, but he prepared himself. Just like Dr. Okigbo said, Okigbo was his classmate in Yabatek, and he wrote, he read wide in philosophy, literature, economics, and medicine. In the life of such a rounded and profoundly educated man, medicine was in his calling, politics his career, and wide-ranging intellectual pursuits his metic. He was prepared for leadership. He also continued to say that Okpara's medical training, he believed, perfectly made him the right person for his kind of policy, which is more or less humanitarian. Sadly, today, most of our political leaders are obsessed about power and less concerned with acquiring the skills needed for effective leadership. And by this, I don't necessarily mean formal education, for as the American writer and polemist Mark Twain reminds us not to let school stand between us and the education. Yet, the point must be made that effective public governance requires some basic skills that those aspiring to public office must acquaint themselves with. This now brings us to Okparanomics, which we cannot go through because of time, but his Okparanomics mainly dwells on his legacy, primarily his agricultural revolution, industrialization. The patriarch has mentioned about different industrial clusters and industries set up by the government that ran effectively, profitably well, that created employment. Today is a general consensus that government can do business, that government business don't work. Why did they work during M.I. Okpara's era? He also got into agriculture, his education. You remember the competitive federalism then allowed the regions to compete. As soon as Awolowo introduced his free education, M.I. Okpara caught up with it. When we talk about free education up to primary level, today might mean nothing to young people today or kids of nowadays, but primary education then was the basis of everything, because at primary 6, you already, anything you want to be, you can be a teacher and so on. So having it free in the midst of the poverty people lived in was such a big deal. His agricultural revolution and animal husbandry demystified a whole lot of myth. In those days, rice was such a great deal. People eat rice during festive period, maybe once or twice in a year, but because of its success in agricultural, rains, rice was abundantly everywhere, it became a regular menu in our meal. Obviously, you don't talk about egg. Those days, if you eat egg, if you ask for it, it's like you're already born to be a criminal. But because of success Okpara brought in those areas, he demystified that with the program of one day, one person, one egg. These things have become a regular thing in our life today. The other infrastructural developments were enormous. His health program, especially in the primary sector, health sector, was great. He had a lot of plans for the secondary and the reference hospitals. It's on record that he has engaged in discussions with Soviet Union then to build major reference hospitals in different regions, in different parts of the region. So I didn't dwell mainly into this. What I want to share more with you is my takeaway from his legacy. And among our key takeaways is that leadership matters. Vision matters. Integrity matters. Policy articulation and implementation also matter. Even more importantly, that government is about people, especially the vast majorities who often work so hard but lack a voice and just need small help just by way of public policy to just get life going. How much of this do our leaders today think about? Our leadership dwell more or less on our friends, the number of kilometer roads we have constructed in our state. What about those citizens who don't even get out of their houses? In the course of my work in my foundation, I realized there are people, brothers and sisters who might be next door. They've never crossed their boundary for 6 months. They've never been visited by anybody for 6 months. They feed on their faces, they roll on the floor, they are sick, nobody gets to them. These people exist around us. How much do we care for them? As a visionary, Okpara was way ahead of his time. Some of the things that defined his leadership in the 60s are only becoming fashionable today. For example, he encouraged private-public partnership, which is popularly known today as PPP and Triple P. He also had a people-centered approach to governance, which United Nations today call what they call human security. These were the things Okpara was practicing in the past. Later on, Okpara has remained a benchmark for good governance, not just in the geographic area that previously constituted the eastern region, but in Nigeria at large. Virtually, all informed commentators agree that since the end of his premiership in 1966, no public officer from the region even comes remotely close to being compared with him. Perhaps one can only talk about, though from a far distance, the likes of Sam Mbakwe. Maybe if His Excellency Dr. Bonayano had stayed longer in the office, we may be mentioning him here. Which begs us the question, therefore, is what becomes of good political leadership in Nigeria? Despite the examples of our founding fathers, who, although imperfect, but left a decent legacy for us to follow. And I really think that in trying to answer this question, we should probably focus as much on the followership as on this, not only leadership. Too often, people get the type of leaders they want. even if sometimes unwittingly. In Nigeria, politicians get away with anything because the followership lets them do. As actions, even the most odious, no longer seem to have consequences. Even more than leadership, democracy is about fellowship. An informed and attentive citizenry that strives to hold the leadership accountable at all times, that insists on full complement of their constitutional rights, and refuse to accept crumbs. I so often wonder how we got to this very low point in our public life of demanding too little from our government, where the payment of salaries is now considered an achievement, despite the relatively enormous amount of resources at their disposal. Of course, no individual company or government can ever have enough resources to do everything, but prudent management, both in government and private sector, demands getting our priorities right. Eliminating waste, and in the case of Nigeria, reducing corruption at all levels. I strongly believe that the governance will drastically improve in Nigeria the day citizens will begin earnestly to interrogate those in leadership positions about the decisions they make on their behalf. I don't know if any of you here agree with me. As our people say, the rat can only erode the cooking pots of those who are asleep. In Igbo, it means no care de livonya mwanya. That perhaps explains why last October NSAS protests, which unfortunately degenerated into violence. It should be a wake-up call to urgently address the deep-rooted structural problems existing within our society, especially with gross level of youth unemployment. That the protest took us by surprise is also emblematic of a fundamental governance problem: the disconnect between government and the governed. The abuses by SARS operatives were not new, they have been there. In truth, they have gone on for decades, but successive governments either played the ostrich or were probably ignorant of it, which is even worse. Good governance is tied to human security, and they didn't require the protest and the unfortunate violence it's engendered to address the problem. It will cost a whole lot to replenish the damaged infrastructures. Despite the unfortunate violence and looting, I view the NSAS protest as a desperate cry for help by Nigerian youth. And if we heard them loud and clear, as some of our elected officials at all levels have claimed, our political governance culture must change. Coming on the heels of Nigeria's 60th independence anniversary, the NSAS protest is an inflection point of our nation's history, which calls for deep introspection to address our myriad developmental challenges, of which youth unemployment is a key part of. When we talk about employment, it is a solution to a whole lot of things. When the patriarch was talking about his father, he narrated incidents where he went to a function, came back 36 months after, and asked them if anybody is unemployed, right? And the answer was no. A well-employed person, what has he got with demonstration or banditry? Employment is the key, and that can only come from good governance. And to perhaps quote James Freeman Clark, who says, maybe until Nigerian political class should start thinking more about the next generation and not the next election. Further, the NSAS process should be a wake-up call for us, the elites who often think that we're in a privileged solution and position, that we're insulated from the problem. But the disruptions and insecurity caused by the protests only underscore that whatever relative comfort we may enjoy, we are all on the same boat, and that such privileges are no more than occupying choice seats on the deck of a Titanic boat. By the time it erupts, we'll all be victims. So I cut off already a large chunk of that part, summarize that. But now looking into the future, can we recreate? Somebody talked about recreating Okparanomics and then my Okpara model. Both in the old Eastern region and in Nigeria at large, the human and material resources to achieve greatness abound. What is often lacking is visionary leadership, along with the courage and integrity required to bring the people along, as most Nigerians have become so jaded and intensely distrustful of their political class. To return Igbo land into the progressive development template begun by Okpara, we therefore must take conscious effort at changing our leadership selection process. I emphasize leadership selection process to ensure that only those who have the right kind of character, capacity, and with an eye on developing legacies for society, not for personal enhancement and wealth, are entrusted with public office. Okpara has no personal house as premier that I've mentioned, but people at all parts of Nigeria were enjoying his great works. There was tap-borne water. Growing up, we remember the water works. We had tap-borne water in our communities. The least thing that anybody needs for development. Now the question is, how is it that a people under a regime with far less technological resources and less exposure were self-sufficient in food production and had jobs for almost everyone, have become heavily dependent on food imports with their youth roaming the streets in search of work? How come that a people whose son, Professor Augustine Njoku, developed a cholera vaccine in 1971 today barely registered in the global race for new therapeutics? How is it that a people whose progenitors left indelible landmarks in different professions, commerce, and industry, are now at the whipping end of faltering republic? How is it that a people to whom Dr. Okpara bequeathed industrial estates are now more comfortable with importing even toothpicks and sundry products from Asia? What became of the quality of our barmaid products, which was mentioned here by the patriarch? The questions can go on and on. How is it that many of the factories that dotted the abandoned nature landscapes have today been converted into places of worship where our frustrated and gullible brothers and sisters are encouraged to pray for miracles? Whenever I drive through Onitsha, I see our water layout, which was a prime estate before even Lekki. At that point it was developed. Lekki was still Marako. Today, how do you weigh both? The properties there are probably of the same value for the last 40 years, and Lekki is soaring in hundreds of millions. How come our youths have abandoned our time-honored apprenticeship scheme, lauded by no other than Ted reports as the biggest venture capitalism in the world, to take a betting as means of livelihood? Yes, you know about the betting. There are bet businesses all over. How many of the cottage hospitals established by Okpara administration are still operational? How come the St. Charles Borromeo Specialist Hospital, built in 1964 by the Archdiocese of Onitsha, is still actively rendering quality services, and those built by Okpara administration are not doing as well? And they say government can do business. That's not enough reason. As my friend Mr. Peter Obi, an accomplished administrator, will say, are we cost or are we the cause? Okpara's magic can be reinvented. We try to look at it in my journey towards being the governor of Anambra State. I have operated primarily in the private sector, part of the comfortable elite who held the view that ours is to enjoy the comfort that our wealth provides, while governance and leadership is for the politicians, irrespective of how ill-prepared they may be. However, after a very deep introspection and reflection on the state of affairs in our nation, at a personal retreat I had in 2017, I decided that rather than sit back and blame our leaders or failing to build on the legacies that likes of Okpara bequeathed to us, I would get involved in elective office to help find solutions to the needs of our people. You did? Yes, talking is cheap. Action is needed. It is for this reason and none that I have decided to offer myself to serve Anambra State as governor. In doing this, however, I have committed everything into the hands of God and insist that if it is not His will, let it not be. If it is God's will, then God will lead the way and provide me with the necessary support for the next primaries and the election coming soon. In offering myself for service of Anambra State and its people, I have decided to sacrifice personal comfort, roll my sleeves, and dirty my hands in order to build on the legacies Dr. Okpara left behind. It is therefore for me a call to serve the people of Anambra State in particular and Nigeria at large. That is why my mission philosophy is just simply Makelo Oloma, which means for the good of the people. It is designed to comfort all citizens of Anambra. It will be government that is creative, purposeful, led with courage and driven by sharpened administrative skill, intelligence, and experience. We envisage a selfless and a caring shepherd leadership. It's not that Dr. Okpara did in the Old Western region for which we remember him today and celebrate him. As the great Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa often said, politics is too serious to be left in the hands of career politicians. Like I had said severally, I am in the race just to make positive impact on lives and lift our state from the poor level of governance where it has been brought to and offer a new meaning to leadership. I intend to bring about a situation where the people are at the center of every government decision and policy. I intend to rebuild our ethical infrastructure and tap into the abundant human capacity of our state to help recreate 21st century Okpara magic. I mean 21st century Okpara magic. Most of my colleagues, aspirants, and contenders are here. They may not have had the reason why. Now they know maybe we can have a meeting at the end of this lecture. And I can see them all over. We are very good friends. In pursuing this vision, I have outlined a carefully, thoroughly thought, debated 10-point agenda for the common good of our people and the edification of the human person in line with Okpara. There are just 10 points agenda. I'm not going to give the details that are contained in the lecture. But primarily, my quest to lead Anambra into a new future is backed by leadership ideology to run an open, consultative, and all-inclusive government. It shall be a government that is transparent, creative, and accountable, respects rules, procedures, and observes the separation of powers and responsibilities of different arms of government. It shall give due consideration to equity, gender balance, and fairness in allocation of resources, projects, appointments among the 3 senatorial zones. It shall accord maximum respect to elders, traditional institutions, and others. Like Okpara, mine is humanistic, people-centered economic vision anchored on the twin pillars of wealth creation and poverty eradication. Ladies and gentlemen, I am fired by the zeal to change the narrative on Anambra and the Southeast. Our people seem entrapped. They seek a new leadership, one that will inspire them to do more for themselves and their various communities. I recall a message I received on my phone after a recent live interview. A friend of mine sent me a message saying, "Good morning, Okpara. I have watched your 2 interviews on AIT and today on Arise TV. My deduction from your brilliant answers to questions on your plans to manage Anambra State better when you become the governor. I saw brilliant, well-articulated plans to uplift our state from the complete mismanagement of all aspects of the state, so much so that those of us who believed in the viability of our state on creation and invested heavily in the state are now regretting investing in the state. I had wanted to take some drastic decisions regarding 2 of my investments in that state. However, after listening to you, I think I will tarry a little bit while." That's what we are coming with. While I am not and cannot be Dr. Okpara, I am, however, immensely inspired by his leadership credentials, just like he was inspired by the charisma of the great Zik of Africa. Okpara had no godfather and did not need any one of the godfathers to excel. He had God leading him. Being new in electoral politics, people often ask me, "Who is your godfather?" And my honest answer is that I have no godfather, but I have only Father God, the Almighty, who brings to fruition every good intentions of man. I therefore commit the next projects and the elections into his hands and pray for success. May God lead us to expected victory for the good of Anambra, Ebola, Nigeria, and humanity at large. It is about a new leadership that makes a difference. Despite the pervading gloom, a new dawn will emerge, and the Southeast and Nigeria will fulfill their promise. May God help us. Perfect timing. I am happy to hear there is Okpara University of Technology, Agriculture. Our heroes past should be immortalized. We need to build institutions. Somebody has said in this pulpit that young people need heroes to emulate. But when they do not have edifice where they can learn and know about their footprints, they will just be looking at the wrong role models.